exposed coasts. To finish off the week and into the weekend, we're expecting further unsettled weather with heavy rain and some strong winds, so do keep an eye on our forecasts.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight.
National insurance, up. Yeah. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up.
And now inflation is up as well. Within 6 months of taking office, Labour's economic agenda has failed. I'll be asking the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith, how to stop Labour dragging the UK back into the 1970s. Talking of disastrous Labour policies, an estimated 100,000 pensioners are set to be pushed into poverty because of the withdrawal of winter fuel payments. And as a Jaguar owner, I was particularly sorry to see its ugly rebrand, which fails to learn from the similar failures, including, famously, British Airways. Plus, a Congolese migrant who was granted asylum after several failed deportation attempts has been jailed for raping a minor, making a mockery of our asylum system. State of the Nation starts now. To be joined by my most formidable panel, the former Conservative MP and Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. As ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. Let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophie Reaper.
A very good evening to you. The time is just after 8 o'clock and these are your latest headlines. Today, there have been unconfirmed reports that Ukraine has fired long-range British Storm Shadow missiles into Russian territory for the first time. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Keir Starmer said his office would not be commenting on reports or operational matters. Britain has previously said Ukraine could use Storm Shadow missiles within Ukrainian territory, but the government has been pressing the US to allow their use to strike targets inside Russia for several months. Speaking exclusively to GB News, Tory party leader Kemi Badenoch said we need to do everything in our power to support Ukraine.
I'd like to see de-escalation, but that needs to start with the Russians, who are the aggressor in this conflict. I believe that supporting Ukraine is the right thing. This is a proxy war that Ukraine is fighting on behalf of the rest of Europe, and I think we need to do everything we can to support them. Using British missiles at a time when we believe that Ukraine is fighting for all of Europe, in my view, is not the right way to look at things. Do we want Ukraine to win this war or not? And are we prepared to support them to win this war? That is what I believe.
Meanwhile, amid concerns over President-elect Donald Trump's promises to hike trade tariffs, his son Eric has told GB News his father wants a strong relationship with the UK.
My father generally likes free trade, but free trade has not been free. All right. And so people like to hide behind the guise of the words free trade, but it's just the guise of cheap words. I think my father would love nothing better to have a great relationship with the UK.
Does the behaviour of Labour activists, Labour MPs, would that stick in your father's mind when it comes to trade deals and tariffs? Yeah.
Do I think that helps foreign relations? No, I don't think that helps foreign relations.
Elsewhere, the funeral of One Direction star Liam Payne has taken place today. Liam's girlfriend, Kate Cassidy, arrived at St Mary's Church in Amersham in Buckinghamshire, along with dozens of locals and fans who gathered outside the church to pay their final respects. One Direction star Harry Styles was also at the funeral, along with former bandmates Niall Horan, Zayn Malik and Louis Tomlinson. Liam passed away on October 16th, aged 31, after falling from his third-floor balcony in Argentina. And in weather news, snow will continue to fall over the weekend, the Met Office has said. Between 2 and 5 centimetres of snow is expected widely over the coming days, whilst it could reach 10 centimetres in some parts of the northwest mainland, with higher ground potentially even seeing up to 15 to 20 centimetres. Meanwhile, over the weekend, heavy snow is expected on Saturday, followed by a rapid thaw and rain on Saturday night across much of the UK. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper, and now it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. As the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, said at the budget, under Labour, national insurance is up, capital gains tax is up, inheritance tax is up, energy taxes are up and stamp duty is up. So perhaps it's no surprise then that inflation is now up too. Indeed, it's above the Bank of England's target rate of 2.3%. In less than 6 months since taking office, Labour's economic agenda has already failed. For months, Labour positioned itself as the party of stability and security. Indeed, Red Rachel tried to brand her economics doctrine as Securonomics, and it was under this further piece of disinformation from Red Rachel that she aimed to build confidence around her and the idea that she could be trusted. She can't even be trusted with her CV, but certainly not with the economy. Let's look at the facts. When Labour took power, it inherited some of the strongest growth in the G7. But then it spent 3 months telling everyone we were all doomed, how awful Britain is. In spite of claiming they were going for growth, they endlessly undermined the economy and spooked the markets, deterring investment. This was followed by a raw socialist budget that attacked business and the creators of wealth. Worst of all is its £25 billion national insurance raid, a policy that broke its manifesto commitment. It's prompted the Bank of England, hardly a bastion of right-wingery, mainly a left-wing woke organisation, along with Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, Boots and Amazon, all to warn of job cuts and price rises. The price rises will then keep interest rates higher than they need to be. And this will affect you. This will affect households whose mortgages will cost more and will increase the yield on government debt, which will add to the burden of taxation. It's worth remembering, when the PM said there was confidence in his mission from business, but today Ford announces job cuts across the country. Not only will we be a high tax, but also a high regulation economy. Only today, the House of Lords has a bill in committee which will make it easier to adopt the European Union's rules and regulations, as if Brexit had never happened. And we know exactly what that means. More red tape, more regulation, less innovation, less entrepreneurship. When you compound all of these issues with Labour's disastrous handling of the farmers' inheritance tax hike, the fact that 100,000 pensioners have been dragged into poverty after Labour took their winter fuel allowance without giving any thought to the effects of it, to give the money to overpaid train drivers and their other friends in the public sector, mortgages and rents that are going to go up, it's become increasingly clear that Labour's economic agenda has failed in the way Labour economic agendas always fail, but this time within 6 months of taking office. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm delighted to be joined now by the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith. Andrew, thank you very much for coming in. To what extent is Labour simply dealing with problems that were left behind by the Conservatives? That is to say that expenditure's too high and tax is too high, but it was too high at the Conservative budget in March.
Yeah, look, and we were very clear, and Kemi, my leader, has been very clear that, we didn't get everything right. But I would draw an enormous contrast between trying to do the right thing, trying to bear down, as you and I were, on the costs, the level of public spending, get people to take risks, support wealth creators. So trying to do the right thing and sometimes inexpertly and sometimes being foiled by a machine that wasn't harnessed to do that. And actually an economic illiteracy to create a two-tier economy and making all sorts of decisions, both on the public spending side, pouring more money into unreformed public services, and then raising that money through a series of very inexpert taxes that are designed to create enormous pain on relatively small parts of the population, other than national insurance, which will affect us all. As you said, just when we'd got inflation under control, people could go back to the supermarket with confidence that their weekly shop wasn't going to increase. The actions that Labour are taking, and bear in mind most of them haven't even started. What we saw in today's inflation figures were really just the costs of high energy, and we know that energy costs in the UK are too high. The impact of the budget on national insurance, I've been talking to top bosses from the sort of organisations you talked about. They're either going to have to put up prices or they're going to have to pare back on the number of employees or the number of hours those employees do, and that's going to have a really big impact on inflation.
And the public sector is being feather-bedded at the same point. As you say, more money being poured in. It's a two-tier economy, Jacob. That's what we're seeing. If you're in the public sector, not only are you getting big pay rises, but most of the public sector organisations are being cushioned from these rises by national insurance, by promises of more money, or indeed more money now. If you're in the private sector, or if you're just an individual, a farmer, a pensioner, there's no cushioning at all. In fact, you'll see your bills go up, and if you're paying taxes, you'll see your taxes pay up, and if you're trying to pass on wealth to the next generation, Labour will help themselves to a slice of that too. And as Shadow Business Secretary, what would you do to encourage growth? Because there isn't any room for tax cuts with the level of expenditure there is. You see with the attempt to cut the fuel allowance for the elderly that even making small cuts is politically extremely unpopular. How do you get the elusive growth in the economy that we need?
Well, the big answer to that is you've got to have reform. And you can't, no politician, and different politicians of different parties over the years haven't been fully honest about the state of the economy. The fact that as a country we are spending £100 billion a year, and we have a very largely unreformed welfare service that is, again, consuming more and more money, and that's why Labour, one of the reasons why Labour are putting up taxes. So you've got to be serious about an agenda for reform. We need fewer, in my view, you need fewer civil servants. It's ultimately people that spend money, whether you were, as I was, running a business or whether you're running government. It's people that spend money. And if you have fewer people in our town halls, fewer people in Whitehall, then it is almost an inevitability that we will spend less money. But you also need to be ambitious in terms of welfare reform. We live in a society where too many people of working age could work, but they don't work. We did, actually, in fairness to the Conservatives, at the general election, we put forward a manifesto that reduced the size of Whitehall back to its 2016 levels, so hardly, cutting into bone, but just, removing some of the largesse that had been added. And we also put forward an agenda that had significant billions of welfare reform. In the latest OBR books that were published at the time of the budget, there is not one penny of welfare reform. And so as a result, we're all going to pay more prices.
And then there's the issue of deregulating business. Now, the bill before the House of Lords today is perhaps the most boringly titled bill imaginable, but it's fundamentally important because it will provide a fast pipeline for new EU regulations to come in. Surely the opportunity outside the EU is to deregulate.
Well, absolutely. And that's an agenda that we were able to progress in some areas. We made some progress in, for example, financial services with creating our own rules.
Which was your
about
responsibility.
Financial services. It was my responsibility, amongst others, and I was very proud of the work that we started. And in fairness to this government, they are actually carrying on with some of that because the city is so important. But we didn't make progress on things like product regulation, being able to recognise the standards of other, perfectly sensible countries like Australia or the US that have the same sort of issues. That would have been a benefit to business. It would have streamlined things. And of course, that whole corpus of health and safety, of regulations, it's not just before your viewers jump on in and say, well, Minister Griffith is saying get rid of health and safety. Of course not. Of course not. But we had health and safety regulations before the European Union. As a responsible government, you want to strike the right balance, but it is a balance. And then there's other agendas that you would have talked about, such as net zero, the environmental regulations. We just put, and Kemi talks about this, but we put more and more burdens on business. We never cost those. There's no budget of the regulatory burden on business. And then, of course, inevitably, we all pay a price in terms of either higher prices or businesses or an economy that just doesn't grow.
And it seems to me net zero is going to be one of the key battlegrounds in the next election because our energy prices are a multiple of those of our major competitors. We can't have an efficient economy with that. Do the Conservatives have the courage, the gumption, to challenge the green orthodoxy?
Look, I think we've got a leader. Time will tell, but I think we've got a leader who, when it came to, for example, the equalities brief, Jacob, who absolutely had the courage to challenge the orthodoxy, to call out Tavistock and Mermaids and these other organisations, and to develop and articulate a conservative answer to those questions. So energy is a big domain. How you actually allow business to cut through the thicket of regulation in a responsible way is another. And I'll tell you one more, which is employment law. And it's not about having a safety net in employment, but there is currently a 150-page bill, a trade union-inspired and authored employment bill. It's in my department, the Department for Business and Trade. And if by its own terms, it rolls back almost every piece of sensible, prudent trade union legislation since the end of the 1970s. So all of those bad practices that act as a cost and a brake on people trying to run businesses, looking after their staff, doing a good job, they're nevertheless going to have to cut through a thicket of red tape, more lawyers, more trade unionists, more people running red tape and fewer people actually doing the business in an organisation.
And as a final brief thought, do you think that things have to be very bad before you can take really serious reforming action? That's what we had in 1979, and actually this government looks so bad, so failed in its economic policy, 2028-29, the country will be ready for radical reform.
Look, I hope so, and that is absolutely our job. It is bad out there now, Jacob. We've got an economy that on a per capita basis could well tip into recession. We're 1/4 away from tipping into a per capita recession, despite a government that came into office having lied to the British people about its policies on tax. It's fiddled the fiscal rules, something you and I care a great deal about, because what we're doing is not just the tax that's being extracted now, but also the tax that will be a burden for the next generation. So I think it's bad now. I think you saw on the street yesterday, in one small subset of the economy, people realising what it looks like when a government is so antithetical to people who are trying to do the right thing in society. I hope we don't have 4 years like this as a patriot, but I really hope that we use the time in opposition to craft our arguments, explain to people why it will be different next time, right? I mean, I think if we might earn the right to be heard,
Indeed.
and we've got to come up with clear plans.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll be getting reaction to Andrew Griffith's comments, as well as looking at how the government's own review suggests 100,000 pensioners are facing winter poverty as the government withdraws winter fuel payments.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tell us about this film, because it's obviously come from your own experiences.
We wanted to create something for the entertainment industry that wasn't just another kind of dull documentary. I mean, some of them are brilliant, they're very informative, but you kind of leave a bit bewildered and a little bit kind of flat. So we thought, I've got a passion for writing and you've obviously got an unbounded knowledge on the subject. Why don't we create a film with a kind of satirical look on eating disorders?
So this came it's been made 20 years after your own...
It is 20 years.
20 years,
practically to the day.
So Samantha, you suffered with OCD and an eating disorder as well?
Yes.
And that's when your mum became a counsellor, is that right?
A little bit later on, I think we spent a bit of time in the system and I realised that it wasn't working for us. So I took it on myself to learn as much as I could about the subject.
I call it a tragedy, probably the wrong word, but suffering.
No, it is a tragedy because mental ill health and eating disorders destroy the lives of not only the sufferers but their families as well.
But you've turned that into something so positive and so
It's amazing, really, that 20 years ago our story was just beginning, and 20 years on, what we've done. But I have to say that very little has changed in the system.
I've heard that.
And I think that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, so...
That was why we wanted to... I mean, I work with families every day and I see the destruction that eating disorders and other mental illnesses not just bring to the sufferer, but the whole family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really passions me, because obviously 20 years ago we were there. And I just feel that so much more needs to be done. And I think with eating disorders, there is still a lot of misunderstanding around the subject.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about Labour's failed economic agenda. And Steve says, if you have a Chancellor who hasn't any of the financial experience she claims to have, is it any wonder the economy is stuffed already? Party of Business, Starmer said, monkey business at best. And Andrew says, Jacob, you are so right. Matt, I love mail mogs that begin, Jacob, you are so right. I try and encourage my children to take this line up, but never mind. In stating that Labour cannot be trusted with the nation's finances. They have always taxed and spent money like water and left the economy in real trouble. Civil service needs to be reduced by a large percentage, as you tried to achieve. Well, thank you for those. Well, joining me now for reaction to Shadow Business Secretary Andrew Griffith's comments regarding Labour's economic agenda is former Defence Minister under Tony Blair, Ivor Kaplan. Thank you very much for joining me. Labour has done pretty poorly in the first 3 months with a budget that's going to put up costs and destroy jobs.
Well, it's not quite as simple as any of those kind of comments that Jacob, you might like to make. What we're seeing is the attempt to clear up the mess that has been left us. And whether we want to agree about what the figures are about the mess, around 20 billion, doesn't really matter. The point is that there is a massive mess. And just let me, Jacob, give you a couple of examples that I think will be really, really important to the public people. There's a lot of comment about, I just heard you make that early on, about the railmen and women. Now, the point about the railways and the other things is that there've been a whole series taken by the Conservative government to deal with longer term areas of paying the right amount to these various areas. And the same then applied to the post office and to blood and all those sort of issues that are flying around. What Labour then discovered is that none of those had been funded for when Rachel actually got to the point of delivering the budget on October the 30th. Now, in that instance, where the government of the day had ignored all of those things, it was just allowing, and hoping that something else would happen by the Conservatives. Well, something else has happened, and it is Labour that is trying to clear this up. And it's going to take a bit more time. And as I've said constantly to your colleagues, Jacob, and on here, I think it's right to give the Labour Party the time to develop that. And that's where we are at the present time. And those instances that I just remarked on, of course, have all been then protected in the budget changes on the 30th of October.
All right, but to govern is to choose, and Labour chose that it would give a huge pay increase to well-paid train drivers. That was a cost that the Conservatives would probably not have chosen to make. There were plans underway to reduce the civil service by 100,000, saving perhaps £6 billion a year. This was a choice that the Labour government decided not to make. Instead, it decided to put 25 billion extra taxes on businesses, which will feed through to consumers. And that's what Sainsbury's and the other employers have been saying, along with the Bank of England, that it'll lead to job losses and price rises. These are choices that governments make.
Yes, it is, Jacob, as both you and I know that from our own experiences. And the point here is that when you're going to deal with very important areas of policy in respect of what you've just been saying, what you land up doing is trying to get the best that you can and to try and get the kind of areas. Inflation is a good point today because of the numbers, but all of that is dealt with by the price of energy over a 12-month period. So these are a lot of different areas, and over the next few months and into next year, then I expect to see that Labour will start to see the benefits of what has been a very difficult 3 or 4 months to deal with these matters.
It does, though, look as if the choices have been, as Andrew Griffith was setting out, to squeeze the private sector to protect the public sector, that money is being given without reform. And that seems to me to be one of the fundamental mistakes. I actually had high hopes for Wes Streeting. I think he's an interesting thinker, an intelligent and able man. But we've discovered over decades that if you give more money to the NHS without the reform first, the money gets absorbed, and when you propose the reform, they simply ask for more money. It's much like Danegeld.
Well, you have to find a way of making the NHS run in the way that you want it to. I think Wes will do a fantastic job over them. I'd agree with you entirely there, Jacob. But at the same time, you've got to have the money into the NHS that you need. And part of what happened on the 30th of October was where the centrepiece of the government's budget was. And I think everyone actually does recognise that, whether they agree or don't agree, they do at least recognise that the NHS needs that money, and we need it in other areas of health service, which I know has also drawn out quite a lot of people's views and the need to be able to deal with some of those matters, and I hope we will.
Now, I don't fundamentally disagree with your view that sometimes governments have to take difficult decisions that lead to long-term growth. Where I think I would take a different tag is that if you want to get growth, that comes from the private sector. And therefore, if something needs squeezing, it's public expenditure rather than increasing taxation. And that the consequences of increasing taxation in higher prices and indeed in higher unemployment are the wrong ones to be getting. And that if you want to pay for public services, you need the growth that you get, but that requires business to expand and interest rates to come down, which would be better done by cutting the state back to allow the private sector to flourish.
There's always been a huge difference between what a Conservative Party would like to do and what a Labour Party has had to do. I don't think that's very different. It was broadly the same in 1997, when Labour last came into power. And to some extent, that's always been there. And there's probably always going to be that difference between the two main parties. And is that a problem, really? I'm not sure it is. I think it's good politics. But the one thing
it's democracy at any rate, isn't it? Thank you very much, Ivor.
It's definitely
much appreciated. But I'm grateful for your time. Thank you. As I mentioned, Labour's decision to scrap winter fuel payments has been forecast to drag up to 100,000 pensioners into poverty, just in time for the Arctic chill. Labour did not carry out a formal impact assessment of the policy before making the decision, but an internal review has now brought these figures to light. Well, I'm joined now by my most formidable panel, the former Conservative MP and Cabinet Minister, Sir John Redwood, and the historian and broadcaster, Tessa Dunlop. John, the impact assessments that governments do aren't necessarily very useful, and all governments end up making policy without them. But everyone knew that there were pensioners on the margin who were going to be very badly affected by this, and there's nothing in place for them.
Well, I think government should look at the impacts on pensioners, for example, when they're thinking of taking the pensioner benefit away. And I think I slightly disagree with you. I think our ministers did look at that because that was the whole point of it. was the damage done going to outweigh the savings? And they usually concluded you didn't take these benefits away because the damage did outdo the savings, and they were right. I think it's a tragedy that Labour has done this. The gross amount of money they say they're going to save is only £1.5 billion. It's a lot of money to the pensioners, losing it to pay their bills. It's not a lot of money for the state, as you and I well know. They found 19 billion for carbon capture and storage on the spending side. But it's not going to be 1.5 billion because they've rightly said, well, some more people will qualify for pensioner credit. So a limited number of pensioners will get rather more, and then all the others suffer very badly. The 100,000 have now been identified. It's a disaster.
But the difficulty for us as Conservatives is that we recognise the government is spending too much of our money, but whenever there's an individual thing that should be cut, we're always defending it. What would you cut instead?
Well, that's not my problem. I've always come out with a whole load
But if you think of the Conservatives when we're in government...
I've just given you 19 billion of carbon capture and storage expenditure, which the public sector should not be doing. Our competitors are not doing it. It means higher costs and more complications in our energy sector. And as we've been hearing tonight, lower energy would price people and companies into jobs. There's the huge Bank of England losses I always mention.
Which you always mention, yes.
But these are the tens of billions. And yet we're arguing over 1.5 billion for the poor old pensioners, which could make a big difference to 100,000 of them who are going to go cold.
That's right, isn't it? That actually this payment is a lifeline, clearly to 100,000 pensioners, but actually it makes a difference to many more pensioners than that 100,000.
Yeah, evening.
Good evening.
John, how far are you off the pension status? You just said poor old pensioners, like they're a sort of breed apart. Dare I ask? When would it have kicked in for you?
This isn't about me.
No,
I've been enjoying a good income. I'm talking about people who are trying to live on the state retirement pension and little or not much else.
But one second, until this summer, it was indeed about all pensioners. So not just the poor old pensioners, but all pensioners. And I take umbrage with the clumsy way in which it was done. I think Anna Sarway, who's an infinitely superior leader, the Scottish Labour leader, has it quite right. It should be means tested. I would have said, if any pensioner with an income over 20k, for example, doesn't get a free fuel allowance in the winter. It was done in a ham-fisted way. But if we're going to talk about restructuring the economy, which you've pointed to, without a doubt, and I know this will receive uproar from your predominantly older viewership, we were noticing the adverts tend to be skewed towards the elderly. GB News has an older audience.
My viewers are all young Conservatives, essentially.
I'm sure
they are the youth of Britain.
Ravishing young Conservatives. But just in case there's a couple among them who may be missing their fuel allowance, the hard truth is the pensioners in our country are the most asset-rich generation today walking on British soil. And actually, and I know this is difficult, but Gen Z, in a way that we haven't seen the young generation since the 60s be put upon economically. They have spiralling costs that even we didn't have to consider. Education costs, housing costs, totally out of their reach. The lowest birth rate we've had since the Second World War because people can't afford to breed. So actually we needed to rebalance the economy. They've done it clumsily, and I would have contested it.
I don't particularly disagree with you, but what you need is to free up planning so we can build houses and reduce the cost of housing. This isn't taking money away from pensioners. It's about deregulating and freeing things up for the young so they can afford to have children.
I don't think your mother needed a free fuel allowance, Jacob. I'm just hazarding a guess there. I don't know her
Yeah, but this is completely irrelevant.
It is not irrelevant.
It is, because the numbers who receive the free fuel allowance, who are perfectly well off, are actually remarkably small. That's why previous Conservative governments didn't take it away and didn't means test it, because the saving you get from taking out the Rupert Murdochs of this world is negligible compared to the millions who are dependent upon it, and for whom £200 or £300 a year makes a difference. That's the point, that it's easy to take pot shots at one or two wealthy people. Unfortunately, we've got to move on. So for once...
Got the last word.
I know, I often give you the last word, and you're sure you'll get your own back in a moment. In a moment, we'll be discussing Jaguar. As a Jaguar driver, I'll be giving my view on this boringly insipid rebrand.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. There's snow in the forecast for parts of Scotland and also later on in parts of the southwest. But for many of us, it's going to be dry, plenty of sunshine, but it is going to be feeling cold. That's all thanks to this northerly flow that's stretching across the country, bringing us that risk of snow and the cold feel to the weather. So plenty of wintry showers moving in their way across northern parts of Scotland. These falling as sleet and snow, particularly across high ground, where we're expecting some significant accumulation. For much of the country, there's lots of dry weather on offer this evening, plenty of clear skies, so a sharp frost and plenty of icy stretches by the time we reach the morning. And then some outbreaks of rain just clipping the parts of the southwest by the time we reach Thursday morning too. So plenty of wintry showers continuing across northern parts of Scotland, these feeding inland at times too, with some sleet and some snow. Some just feeding into northern parts of Northern Ireland, perhaps northern parts of Wales too. But for many across northern parts of England, elsewhere across England and Wales, plenty of clear skies to go around. So once again, a sharp frost and some icy stretches. So do take care for the Thursday morning commute. Across the southwest, though, a different story. We have outbreaks of rain just clipping Devon and Cornwall, later on into southern parts of England and Wales. This heavy at times and falling as sleet and snow over high ground, though it's not out of the question that some flurries could fall to lower levels too, which may cause some disruption. Wintry showers continuing across the north, but once again across Wales and the central slice of the UK, plenty of sunshine to go around, though it is going to continue to feel cold. As we head into Wednesday, there is still a risk of some snow showers, particularly around any exposed coasts. But once again, there's still going to be plenty of sunshine on the cards. Still feeling particularly chilly, though, especially in any brisk winds that will catch across any exposed coasts. To finish off the week and into the weekend, we're expecting further unsettled weather with heavy rain and some strong winds. So do keep an eye on our forecasts.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Look, I've got a lovely little Jaguar on my keyring, which tells you that I am a happy, contented Jaguar owner. And its insipid rebrand decision is just reminding people of other similar rebranding failures. The wonderful example when the great Margaret Thatcher put a Kleenex on the tail fin of a British Airways model. Look it up on YouTube, when they removed their flag for some ghastly ethnic design. Or the ridiculousness of Consignia, when the post office gave itself a funny name. And the guttural noise. Do you remember the guttural noise replacing the name of a well-known investment manager, which used to be called Aberdeen and is now called... Well, here's the Jaguar new advert. Well, it doesn't tell you very much about what's being advertised, does it? I think we just better upgrade to Bentleys.
Well, that would be wonderful, yes. I mean, I used to be a Jaguar owner, and I used to replace them quite often, buying a new one, nearly new one as a result. But this isn't going to turn me on. I mean, I want to see the car. Is it attractive? Is it going to work well? It used to be Grace Pace Space was their slogan. And they also were attractively priced, because they weren't the very rich man's car. They were an awful lot cheaper than the very posh motors.
Particularly some of those German cars, yes. But Tessa, isn't this just where businesses lose their way? Because actually, John and I are their typical customers, and that awful advert. It's just humiliating for them, isn't it?
Well, I think it's humiliating for you. They've clearly got such self-belief in their sales model that they are effectively messaging with their vivid slogans, live vivid, delete ordinary, break molds. They are looking at these two grey men, what is it, pale male stale, and they're like, bang, bang, I don't want you anymore.
Yeah, but what they used to do was they used to wow us with a great car.
But
if the advert was a great car, why don't they want to wow us? Because we could actually buy one if it was worthwhile.
That's right, they're a business. They need to appeal to people who can buy their cars. And their electric cars, which they're going on about, don't work. And Giles Corran's written so amusingly about his experience with the Jaguar that never worked and never charged and broke down, and when it breaks down, it's dead. So they have hopeless electric cars. They make really very nice petrol cars, and they seem to be going entirely the wrong way and alienating their traditional customer base, loyal customer base.
Two things. There's clearly a level of complacency that they believe that you'll carry on hanging on to your Jaguar
Hang on, my little
your little go fast petrol motif, and that they are playing a new furrow, a different silo, and they don't want to be connected or associated. So they'll take you on the sly. They don't mind if you crash around in your circa 1990 Jaguar. They just don't want to be associated with you. But I mean, the whole thing.
Where are they getting these new customers from? Their cars aren't cheap. Who's going to be buying something having watched a ridiculous advert like that?
They're going to get a lot dearer, because, I mean, you know, a Jaguar at £40,000-50,000, it's now going to be £100,000.
Because the electric cars are
seriously expensive.
But what's wonderful is that we're talking about them for free, and so did Sky, and so did the Telegraph, and so did the Daily Mail.
But we're making them look stupid. It's like the BA tail fin.
Okay.
When these rebrands make companies look stupid, they don't work. They've got a new logo.
Just to be clear, I'll take a free Jaguar. Hi.
You can look the new logo. You can look the new logo up online. The leader of the opposition, the great Kemi Badenoch, has spoken to GB News about Labour's war on farmers. And as expected, as always, she didn't pull her punches.
Look at the amounts that we're talking about that's being raised. The amounts that the government itself has estimated it'll raise will maybe cover about one day's worth of NHS spending. Yet look at the big pay rises that they've given the unions. Look at how they have created new problems with their GB Energy nonsense. It's not going to work. They are creating problems not just for today, for the future. They won't raise the money that they think they'll raise. A lot of people are just going to give up and stop farming. And then what happens to our food security?
Well, back to my panel. Tessa, this is very important, isn't it? That it's a nasty little raid that doesn't raise any money, and they are stuffing their mates in the public sector's mouths with gold.
It is interesting, I think, the debate around the farmers. I watched with interest that march yesterday and a lot of the sloganeering and a lot of what was said. You know, we belong to the land. You know, it's ours, it's our inheritance. We've got the know-how. You know, and I've talked to you before about my father being a farm manager. So as children, it wasn't the estate owners' children. They were in Eton. It was us. We gathered the sheep, we fed the beasts, we clipped, we burnt the heather. We were the farmers. But there was no point in us going into farming because you ended up with a tied house and paid a pittance. We didn't have the land. And the truth is, Jacob, and this is a brutal truth, and I'm not saying what they've done is right or wrong, but it's an incredibly difficult career to break into because you have to have so much money. And one of the reasons is you have to have so much money is because land now costs so much. So it is a vicious circle, and it does depend on inherited wealth, and that will always be fertile terrain for a Labour government.
For a Labour government, because they think inherited wealth is bad. And Tessa's been actually wonderfully clear that this is about dislike of inherited wealth.
Yes, exactly what it's about, and I think they've misjudged it, because if you were talking about multi-millionaire owners of very large estates, then people don't have so much sympathy for that. But people have enormous sympathy for the family farmer who is struggling to make any kind of living because the returns on capital are almost infinitesimal, and the amount of money they can even pay themselves is not the sort of salary people would get in a decent city job. And so they're not rich, and then they're going to face the breakup of their farm when somebody dies in the family and it has to be passed on.
But I think we also need to own that even if you have a relatively small farm, you are astonishingly not just asset-rich, but very powerful. You know, rural communities operate in a very different, much more hierarchical way. And I was interested by the way in which many people with not a brass farthing to their name, living in a house that doesn't belong to them, will speak up for their landowner or farmer because they depend on it.
OK, but you're looking at it from a very Scottish point of view. In England, there are a lot of smaller farmers who, a lot of them bought their estate, their farm after the First and Second World War. But even if Labour does this and goes through that, it will still be very difficult to break into, your point about getting new people in. And so what you're going to get is the collectivisation of farms, and you're going to take it away from these individuals for whom it's been their life and make it more corporate and probably less efficient.
And there lies the flaw. And I've got to say, despite my resentment towards these great landowners, actually, if I'm honest, I grew up under their sort of shadow, crumbs from their table. But I was staggered that the Labour Party decided to take on in one breath the pensioners, the dear old pensioners, to quote you, and secondly, to take on a job that is revered in children's literature. You don't take on any job revered in children's literature. Doctors, nurses, men with tractors. You leave them alone.
Well, I've given Tessa the last word for once, so thank you to my panel. After the messages, my panel will be discussing the ballooning costs of the COVID inquiry, as well as the Congolese migrant who was granted asylum and went on to be convicted of raping a 15-year-old.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, our next guests have been working closely with celebrities and MPs to help clean up our planet.
Very important. Think Ocean was founded in 2021 with two main goals. One, educating the next generation to make sure that they know when they're growing up that naturally we have to take care of the planet and cleaning pollution that's already in the environment.
Well, joining us now to tell us more is Think Ocean's founder, Hugo Valdez-Vera, and the co-founder, Nolene Mariappan. Really good to see you both this morning. So, Nolene, let's start with you. What is Think Ocean, and why did you want to start this back in 2021?
Yes, so Hugo had actually been working on the environment and climate action for quite a long time. When he moved to the UK, he realised that there was a growing problem with plastic pollution and that more needed to be done because people weren't actually seeing the link between plastic, the impact on the environment and climate change. So he founded the organisation and I joined him with 3 goals, really. Education, looking at technology to scale solutions, and looking at how we develop more circular economy programs. So actually looking at reusing, recycling, actually creating local economies from what people would consider waste.
Hugo, just how bad is plastic pollution around the world, and especially here in the UK?
Well, it is bad, but we don't know the extent of how bad it is. You know, this is not much interest from the bigger players or, you know, some government for us to know every detail of the pollution. So if we know that is from 1 to 10 is 2, probably it's about 6.
Oh.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Before we discuss the Congolese migrant, I wanted to ask my panel about the COVID inquiry, which is now projected to cost over £200 million. Now, this projection has rather annoyed the inquiry, which has fought back boldly, claiming that it does not recognise the figure. Let me let you into a secret. When government departments say they don't recognise the figure, you know they are being very careful not to lie by pointing you in the wrong direction. A confession. I did it myself as a minister. When people were jolly close but not quite there, you could truthfully say you didn't recognise the figure, but it meant that the water was getting quite warm. Well, I'm joined now by my panel from former Conservative MP and Cabinet Ministers John Redwood and the historian broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. Did you ever use the I don't recognise that figure line?
Don't remember doing that, but I think you put it very well. But it may not be 200 million, but it's going to be many, many millions. It's going on too long. It's too rambling. It doesn't focus on the things that matter. The electorate have already judged how the politicians performed over COVID in the general election. That was part of the background to the election. What we need now is a proper analysis of how good was the scientific advice, how could we be better prepared for the next one, what are the real lessons that the governing machine has to learn. But you need focus and you need to get on with it. We can't afford more delay and more cost.
It could have been much more simple, couldn't it? Other countries have done it in a simpler way. And Andrew Tyree did the inquiry into the banking crisis with a parliamentary committee that did it in about a year and cost a couple of £1 million and did a really, really good piece of work.
Yeah, I'm always worried about inquiries. I think in this country we have this incredible penchant for expensive inquiries that deliver their verdicts with no teeth attached. However, I think when it comes to cost and bearing in mind who was in power at the time of the COVID crisis, just to put that figure of £150,000 a day, is it that it's costing this inquiry?
I think more than that, because we're talking about 200 million altogether.
Oh, right, OK, it's approximately, I think, about £150,000 a day. Do you know how much it cost, beginning of 2023, to house the excess 1.5 billion extra items of PPE that was ordered during the COVID crisis? Just have a guess.
I would have done at the time because there was a desperation for PPE. Right. And this turned out to be wrong.
OK.
But the Labour Party, the opposition at the time, was saying, why weren't we buying more PPE faster?
So we were spending, beginning of 2023, slightly less now, £500,000 a day housing excessive quantities of PPE. So surely what we want our COVID inquiry to do, forget the bloodletting. We know that you were all buffoons, forgive me, when it came to handling COVID. Wrong party in power at that time. I'm sure Rachel Reeves would be really good at lockdowns. But
all right, I'm going to leave us on that.
How to manage PPE in the future.
There's no evidence for that whatsoever. This is the woman who just misled the nation completely about her tax strategy and has now launched the biggest tax bomb sale we've ever seen.
I think Tessa said the most wonderfully outrageous thing. I think that may have had an effect on the blood pressure of my viewers, so we can move on to Congolese migrant who was granted asylum after several failed attempts at deportation. He's been jailed for raping a 15-year-old girl. It turns out that one of the deportation attempts that failed was because the crew from Air France refused to take him. So today we're blaming the French. We have asked Air France for comment. Well, back to my panel. Tessa, you are sometimes a bleeding heart liberal. There have been a number of occasions when crews have refused and passengers on board have tried to stop asylum seekers being deported, illegal immigrants in this country being deported. They shouldn't interfere, should they? They should let justice be done, and this dangerous man would have been removed 20 years ago if it hadn't been for Air France.
Do you know what fascinates me is apparently the only time the GB News agenda, and your show in particular, cares about rape, which is a massive problem, is when it's connected to illegal migration. I just put rape and news into Google, and this is what I came up with. Today, in Bristol, 92-year-old man charged with a woman's rape and murder, backdated to 1967. What a fascinating news story and a horrific one. Likewise, teenager jailed for raping two 16-year-old girls in Pembrokeshire. Just today, we could go to France with the gang rape case, 51 people.
We can't discuss cases that are sub judice. The first one, he's just been charged. We have to be incredibly careful, as you know perfectly well. We're very open to discussing all sorts of crime on this programme. One of the things we were talking about with the disgraceful treatment of Alison Pearson was why the Essex police don't deal with more serious crime properly, which obviously includes rape.
OK, the couple who forced teenagers to take part in the rape of their one-year-old baby in Kirkcaldy, Fife, no longer sub judice. Or indeed, the French case, this horrific gang rape. Well, may I go on? The son of the Norwegian Crown Princess who's been arrested on suspicion of rape.
OK, the point's made, but I don't think it's particularly relevant.
I think we're all appalled by rape, and we want strong policies to bring people to book if they are rapists. But this is a rather different question. This is a question about someone who is refused permission to be an asylum seeker in Britain, and he's found to have made an illegal entry, and then there are efforts to remove him which fail for the reasons that Jacob's been describing. And it opens up this whole question of why cannot we even get rid of people who become criminals in Britain before they become criminal, when we correctly identified them as not being suitable to stay here.
Thank you. We're going to have to finish. But thank you very much to my panel. Up next, it's Ben Leo in for Patrick Christie's. Ben, you've got a very big interview coming up this evening with somebody called Trump, I believe.
Yeah, somebody called Trump, Eric Trump, the son, of course, of US President-elect Donald Trump. I went up to Scotland, where they're investing hundreds of millions of pounds in a beautiful new golf course. We talked about everything from £20 billion tariffs on the UK, reported tariffs anyway, comments from Sadiq Khan about Donald Trump, calling him racist and homophobic. Will the actions and behaviours of Labour politicians this side of the pond mean Donald Trump slaps us with those tariffs? Also, a rallying cry for farmers from the US. They have their backs. Free speech under threat in the UK as well. A big 2 hours coming up.
Oh, that's going to be very exciting. Well, the one thing I have in common with Donald Trump is that David Lammy thinks we're both Nazis. Well, there we go. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset, in spite of it being cold everywhere, our veritable own Garden of Eden will have beautiful weather tomorrow.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. There's snow in the forecast for parts of Scotland and also later on in parts of the southwest. But for many of us, it's going to be dry, plenty of sunshine, but it is going to be feeling cold. That's all thanks to this northerly flow that's stretching across the country, bringing us that risk of snow and the cold feel to the weather. So plenty of wintry showers moving in their way across northern parts of Scotland, these falling as sleet and snow, particularly across high ground, where we're expecting some significant accumulation regulations. For much of the country, there's lots of dry weather on offer this evening, plenty of clear skies, so a sharp frost and plenty of icy stretches by the time we reach the morning. And then some outbreaks of rain just clipping the parts of the southwest by the time we reach Thursday morning too. So plenty of wintry showers continuing across northern parts of Scotland, these feeding inland at times too, with some sleet and some snow. Some just feeding into northern parts of Northern Ireland, perhaps northern parts of Wales too. But for many across northern parts of England, elsewhere across England and Wales, plenty of clear skies to go around. So once again, a sharp frost and some icy stretches, so do take care for the Thursday morning commute. Across the southwest, though, a different story. We have outbreaks of rain just clipping Devon and Cornwall, later on into southern parts of England and Wales. This heavy at times of falling as sleet and snow over high ground, though it's not out of the question that some flurries could fall to lower levels too, which may cause some disruption. Wintry showers continuing across the north, but once again across Wales and the central slice of the UK.